Hello and welcome to the Global Conversation. My guest today is Marine Le Pen, president of France's National Rally Party. We'll be talking about Europe and especially the European elections that take place at the end of May.
Bonjour, Madame Le Pen.
Bonjour.
We're going to spend 20 minutes together in an uncut interview. Are you hoping to beat the exceptional score you got in 2014 at 25%?
The French political situation is a little different now. There's an extra party en marche. But more than anything, what I want is to finish first for two reasons. Firstly, for a European reason. I want us to be part of a very large group that defends nations and opposes this European Union that we believe has failed and is bankrupt. But also for a national reason. I think it's absolutely essential that Emmanuel Macron is beaten in what are sort of midterms, so that a message is sent that he can't continue the second part of his mandate like he started the first.
En Marche, allied with Modem, are a little bit ahead of you in the polls. Do you still think you can do better than them?
Yes. Yes, I think so. But what this says already is that we're the #1 party in France because, as you rightly point out, the En Marche list is in fact a coalition with Modem and Agir, and I might add a part of Les Républicains too, because M. Juppé and M. Raffarin aren't exactly unheard of as leaders of Les Républicains, and they've already said they support the En Marche list. And despite all that, I think we will actually come first in the European elections because we symbolise hope for Europe. People have been left without hope by this European Union, which acts like a prison with its blackmail and its threats and then its results, which are very poor. Whereas there's another Europe to be built. To save Europe, we must turn away from the European Union.
We'll come to that in a moment. First, can you unveil some of your manifesto commitments for us? Your program has not been announced officially yet, but could you tell Euronews the 3 points you consider to be the most important?
There are 3 important points that concern bringing back protection. First, protecting nations, so abolishing Schengen, that's obvious. It's urgent to retake control of our borders. We could envisage a Frontex-type structure of international coastguards that would intervene, but only at the request of states faced with problems of mass migration. But obviously, we must retake control of our borders. Secondly, we must stop unfair international competition. That is to say, goods that we're not allowed to cultivate or manufacture in the European Union shouldn't be imported into the European Union. We need to avoid unfair international competition. And in a third phase, we've got to stop all these free trade agreements because free trade agreements represent the anti-ecological model in all its splendor. We need to establish locally focused policies based on proximity to production because that's what will preserve our territories and preserve our planet. There are lots of other topics, but these ones are essential.
Let's go back to the last point. Don't you think Europe is stronger staying together on international trade when it comes to facing up to blocs like China or the United States? That would be less strong dispersed into 27 sovereign nations, 28 soon to be 27.
I'm sorry, we've already been fed that line. That's the philosophy that's been adopted over the last 25 years. The European Union as a supranational structure has brought only weakness, and that's putting it mildly. The Eurozone is the region with the weakest growth rate in the world. There's been massive deindustrialization in our countries, rising unemployment, increasing poverty, sanitary standards declining due to mass imports. So the theory doesn't hold. On the other hand, if nations together cooperate because they decide they want to cooperate, not being forced to do so against their interests, but because they want to, because they see value in it for building projects. Yes, of course, it's our vision. That's Airbus, in fact, that's Ariane, and that works.
Okay, but without the common agricultural policy, I don't think French agriculture could survive.
Excuse me, it's survived for centuries without the CAP.
Yes, but today's economic model is very different. Without European aid to French farmers, 9 billion, 7 billion of it direct, French agriculture could not survive.
Yes, but this money isn't manufactured in an EU cellar. Mr. Juncker doesn't have some grotto with a machine that prints money. This money comes out of French pockets. In reality, we have poured.
But Europeans too, everyone contributes and we receive.
Everyone contributes and we receive. There are those who contribute a lot more than they receive.
Depending on their GDP and the state of their economy.
OK, but it's the case for France.
Well, it's about solidarity.
You think so? We've paid 100 billion net over 20 years. 100 billion.
The numbers are debatable. There are different ways of calculating, taking into account customs duties.
We have paid net 100 billion over 20 years. As a result, quite properly, we receive back a small portion of what we poured in. Now, objectively, look at the results of the common agricultural policy relative to its goals, and then tell me French farmers are supposed to be celebrating. Because what I see is the disappearance of family farming as a model. What I see is farmers put in unfair competition with producers who don't meet the standards that they have to follow. What I see is the gradual disappearance of protection that was in place, such as milk and sugar quotas. So, in all honesty, we can't say today that the common agricultural policy is fulfilling its mission, especially given their plans to reduce it by 5%.
Yes, and that's something you complained about yourself at the Paris Agricultural Fair.
So I should think.
So are you saying we need Europe, in fact?
This is our money. As things are, the common agricultural policy is how European agriculture works. So obviously I'm against it when I hear we're going to receive even less than we get at the moment, putting farmers in difficulty when they're already unable to live off their work. I want us to get the most back we can from the money we gave to the European Union, or that we give less. But we can't lose out like we do at the moment. That's not possible.
Let's talk about this very important question. What happens after the European elections? You're looking to build a bigger group than the one you struggled to build in 2014, which you only managed to create in 2015. Now, with the rise of nationalist movements throughout Europe, are you hoping for a larger group? Are you already sounding out newcomers, such as Vox, for example?
We have discussions with everyone. Matteo Salvini.
Of course, he's already in your group.
Exactly. We asked Matteo Salvini to be the one to go round the European capitals to try to find new allies. We ourselves will increase our numbers, that's certain, but of course we want to expand. And I'm not hiding it. We've got a much bigger ambition, or dream at any rate, to build a very big group composed of all of those who want to protect nations. We could have a large part of the ECR, maybe the EFDD and the ENL. That's something that would be really quite interesting.
But doesn't the anti-democratic drift of some of your potential allies bother you? I'm thinking about the example of Vox, which is quite new on the political scene. They made a breakthrough in regional elections in Andalusia. This is a party that takes some very sexist positions, which wants to amend laws on violence against women, which wants to stop abortion, funding for abortions. As a party president and a woman, where do you stand on having allies like that?
Vox split from the People's Party. They don't originate from an extremist party. It's a splinter from the People's Party. Nobody was worried when these ideas were discussed within the People's Party. So again, you see, we're looking at things with an ideological slant. But I'm a sovereignist. I'm a Democrat.
So each to their own.
But exactly.
But you still want to be part of the same group.
But, sorry, I think it's up to the Spanish people to decide for themselves. And if Vox scores a spectacular electoral success, it's probably because what they talk about corresponds to the concerns of the Spanish people. I don't interfere in Spanish affairs, and that, I think, is the problem with the European Union, which, at the end of the day, wants to impose a unique model on countries countries that, I'm sorry to have to remind you, are different, have a different culture, have a different story. We certainly have a common European culture, but we all have our own traits, our own identity, sometimes even an economic identity, points of strength, points of weakness. And thank goodness for that, because we say united in diversity. But tell me, where is the diversity today in a European Union that wants everyone eating from the same trough?
European Union or NATO, don't you think there should be a common base of rights that are both respected and respectable?
You say that, that's your point of view, that's your opinion. I haven't seen anything in what's being proposed.
No, that's the opinion of a Democrat, and I imagine you're a Democrat too.
I haven't seen anything in what Vox has said or done that leads me to believe they're anti-feminist and so on.
It's in their program.
What's in their program?
The fact that they want to revoke the law on the protection of women from violence is in their program.
No, but what does revoking mean?
Make amendments for there to be less protection.
If you ask them the question, they'll tell you no, it's for this and that reason. We think the law is badly constructed and so on. I don't believe it for a second when journalists ask me questions like this, because I find out every time the reality is quite different.
It's not the opinion of a journalist. We've read their program, we've reported on them and met them.
Very nice. Well, it seems to please the Spanish anyway.
Well, a small minority anyway. Tell us a little about this European alliance of nations. You no longer want the European Union, not in its current form anyway. What's an alliance of nations?
It's simple. If you like, we've always mixed up Europe and the European Union. When we talk about the European Union, we talk about Europe. I completely separate the two. Let's say it's like people telling me, you're against aviation. No, I'm for aviation. I think it's a great human adventure, but I'm against the airline. The European Union is the airline. I want to change the airline. I want there to be a European organisation. I want nations to agree in a number of areas. Not all of those covered today by the European Union and not in the current conditions. I don't want a commission taking the initiative over legislation that's made up of people who aren't elected, who aren't accountable to anyone, and who don't, therefore, have the will to defend the interests of France in particular. So I think there's the Council and there's the European Parliament that are two structures that are democratic. And the Commission, therefore, should just be a technical secretariat, not this all-powerful body it's become over time, because it's grabbed powers it shouldn't have. I think in a whole series of areas, we've missed out on the big revolutions of the 21st century. The European Union has caused us to miss out. Artificial intelligence, zero from the European Union. Protection, zero. Protection of our national companies, of our European companies, so European Union companies against the extraterritoriality of American law, zero.
But there are subsidies for artificial intelligence. But let's not get into these details here.
So it's ineffective. It's spending our money for nothing.
No, that's not completely true. There is cutting-edge research in place.
So we're going to do better in the future? Listen, don't give me that. When we're digitally colonized today by the United States and China, when 20 years ago Europe was at the forefront of digital technology with Nokia and a whole series of other very large companies, we were ahead of the world. And in 20 years, the European Union lost us our advantage because once again, it got involved with things that were none of its business, but it didn't get involved where it should have done.
Do you think France alone could compete with China or the United States?
But France has managed alone to create global giants. And ever since, these global giants have collapsed, one after the other. So yes, I think France can do so alone. But this is not my point. France can do so alone, but I think France should be able to do so with Italy, with Hungary, with Austria, with Poland, with countries that do want to take the challenge on and preserve our businesses and preserve our sovereignty, and also, incidentally, protect our countries from today's problem of mass immigration.
I was surprised you didn't mention that as one of your program's highlights.
Yes, I did. I spoke about Schengen. Borders are essential.
And a concerted, constructive European immigration policy. You don't believe in that? Everyone should fend for themselves?
No. But I'll tell you why I don't believe it. Because you want me to entrust the fight against immigration to the European Commission. But the European Commission is for immigration. It says that in any case we need it. We need immigration to save our pensions. We need immigration to fight against falling birth rates.
But there are sovereign countries that think that, like Germany.
Okay, but they're sovereign.
I don't think the European Commission is telling European Union states to take in migrants to pay for their pension plans.
But if the Germans decide to welcome 1 million migrants, that's their problem.
Their growth rate is higher than France.
It's got nothing to do with immigration. I'm sorry, please don't mix everything up.
I think there are countries like Canada that have selective immigration based on diplomas and levels of education that are doing quite well.
Very well, but that's their choice. Let's see what happens. Because in Germany, I think it's coming back to haunt them, and that Mrs. Merkel, having welcomed 1 million migrants, is now tightening the screws. The unfortunate thing, though, is that when Mrs. Merkel brings in 1 million people, how many hundreds of thousands end up later in France? And that does pose a problem for me. You see, if each country takes responsibility for its own immigration policy, that's okay. But put regulation in the hands of the Commission, which is pro-immigration.
But the idea of a European border police, Frontex, that kind of organization, do you or don't you believe it has a role to play?
Why not? But again, only if it comes on top of each country's protection of its own borders and management of its own immigration policy. Tomorrow, let's say Greece is facing a mass flow of migrants and is protecting its borders and calls on Frontex. A bit like when Mali called for help from the French army when it was in trouble. Why not? But what is Frontex today? It's a welcoming party for immigrants. Frontex is not there to prevent immigration. Frontex doesn't take illegal immigrants back to their own country. It doesn't seize boats and take them back to their port of departure. They're like front desk receptionists. They manage migrant camps and organise all that. Well, no, right now, Frontex doesn't meet the targets or fulfil the missions that I would want.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about international politics, at any rate, your international connections. We know you're quite close to Steve Bannon, who you've met. He's created this foundation called The Movement, which you have chosen not to join. Why? The Movement is this idea of bringing together European nationalist populist groups and parties, and it's going to organize a big rally before the European elections. Will you be going?
No, we haven't said we won't.
No, I'm asking you why you're not in the movement when there are parties that are in it.
The reality is we're waiting for someone to define the shape and scope of this foundation. I'm okay with the idea of a foundation where Italian, French and Austrian experts can discuss issues, hold roundtable talks and share experiences.
And it doesn't bother you that an American is behind that?
But no, it's not a European foundation, it's a global foundation. We need to talk with Russians, we need to talk with Americans. Very soon you'll see we're at the end of the logic of unfettered globalization, and I'm delighted by that. But in tomorrow's world, we're going to have to think about international trade. Are we going to continue with free trade, or are we going to have fair exchange, which is what we want? Are we going to see intelligent protectionism return as I want, or are we going to continue with total deregulation? All of these things we need to discuss.
So will you be going to the rally? The one that has been announced ahead of the European elections?
Every opportunity, every space to discuss all these things together, of course I think is interesting and important.
Very quickly, we're running out of time. You spoke about Russia. You already have fairly close relations with Russia, don't you?
Well, I have good relations with the United States and with Russia. In fact, I think that's exactly...
No, Mr. Bannon is not the United States.
No, all right, but he's Donald Trump's advisor.
No, not anymore. I believe he's out of favor.
No, I'm not sure about that. Be careful what you say. You know now, with fake news, you have to pay attention to what you say.
We try to avoid that on Euronews.
I have very good relations with the United States and with Russia and with India. And incidentally, I also have relations with China because I think that it's France's role to do so.
Is it why you have Mr. Mariani as number 3 on your list? He's very, very close to the Russians and very often in Russia.
Mr. Mariani there because he's the founder of La Droite Populaire.
He left Les Républicains for you.
It's the rallying together I was looking for.
He's got lots of Russian contacts.
Yes, he has very good relations with the Russians, and that's very good. I've already said there are people on my list who have very good relations with the United States, and that's how it is. And so much the better, because France has a special place in the world. It has to preserve its special voice and be a balancing power. It's this multipolar world that I want to see re-emerge. It's re-emerging, and that's something I believe is essential.
Now, the question I have to ask you, are you going to run again for the presidential election in 2022?
I really have no idea.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Don't you want to take revenge on Mr. Macron?
I'm not motivated by revenge at all. I never look at the past. I prefer to look to the future. It's the National Rally Party members who'll decide when the time comes who's best placed to carry out our ideas. If it's me, I'll go for it. If it's not me, I'm very happy to leave it to others.
Who could it be?
I don't even know who might be a candidate. I want us to win, whoever it takes to get the victory. I want us to win because I think things are going very badly in my country. Every day shows how badly things are going in the country, how it's weakening and in urgent need of a change in direction.
Que notre pays va mal, qu'il s'affaiblit et qu'il faut urgemment changer de direction.
D'accord. Eh ben, je vous remercie.
Thank you for this interview.
Merci, Madame Le Pen.